Hey everybody, we are going to start doing a watercolor technique. If your tray is dirty, then what I want you to do is clean it yourself by getting your paper towel wet and then just going in here and cleaning it. You can also remove this tray just by popping it out, and you can run it under cold water. I just like to get this a little bit wet. And then, I usually stick with those colors and then I dry it out. So that's the easiest way to clean it out without having to get up and leave your seats. Everybody's table has a roll of paper towels at it. I keep one by me at all times while I am painting. So our lid acts as a mixing tray for our colors. And usually at the end of class, I try to clean mine up, but apparently last class, I did not. Good learning method though. Right here, we got to keep this clean. And again, running it under warm water will get out all these little cracks and stuff here. Okay, that just bops right in there. And push it over, you got a little place for your cute little paintbrush. You are also going to take a watercolor paper. You're going to figure out which side is the tooth side and which side is the smooth side by rubbing your finger over it and feeling the difference. If you can't figure out which side is the smooth side, come ask me. Put your name and block on it on the back side. This is my example. We are putting masking tape, just like this, onto our paper using the rule of thirds. So the rule of thirds is blocking it into 3 columns horizontally and vertically. So here's our vertical ones, here's our horizontal ones. And then I just folded the tape under so it'll be easier for me to peel it off later. All right, we are going to work with doing a couple different techniques with our watercolor. The first tip that I want to give you is by having a cup of water and another cup of water. You can see one's already a little bit milkier looking, cloudier than the other one. This one I'm going to use for mixing. This one's going to be used for cleaning. We're also going to use some coarse salt today and some fine salt today and a colored pencil to help us. I guess I'll start with the colored pencil one first because I haven't seen how well this one works. So this is going to be using different types of resists. You can use glue, you can use oil pastels. I'm just drawing a cute little swirl design because you can't even really see what I'm drawing. So I'm going to also put out some oil pastels. This one's going to be our resist. I'm going to grab my oil pastel box right here and grab the white just so you can see it. And then when we paint over it, you are going to notice that the watercolor is being repelled by that. When you're using your colored pencil, you do have to press down kind of hard so that it actually is applying it, because this is waxy. Now I'm going to pick a color, any color, I don't care. But the first rule to watercolor is getting your paintbrush wet. This is my favorite trick that I use. Let me move my paint. I use a little squirt bottle. Oh wow, that one is jammed. And then I spray down my paint so that I can easily, I should dry off my area, so that I can easily use these paints without having to go back and forth and adding too much water. Hopefully my papers didn't get too dang wet. All right, now I'm going to choose my color. I'm going to just go down the line with red. So again, I use my clean water. Now this is nice and thick. I am going to dilute it a little bit here by adding water. And now I'm going to put it right over all that stuff that I did. And if I make it too thick, it might cover up everything. That's why I diluted it. So again, I'm using this one to mix my colors, this one to get clean water. So I'm also going to just pull that down so you can see this gradient. And I can smear it around, and then that oil pastel is popping right back up. You can also dab it, but that fully removes everything, so we do have to be careful with that. So I'm using my tray to mix my colors and putting that right back over it. And then as I'm going down, you can see this finer line detail. Whoops, something fell. You can see where that's at, where my Prismacolors were, and it will slowly push things out. You can see it's starting to appear on the edges. So it's not fully absorbing it. So it's not as thick as the oil pastels, and it's not as resistant. You can see the little water droplets here. So the next thing that we're going to do is we are going to practice mixing on the paper using a wet on wet technique. All right, I don't recommend putting your watercolor palette on top of the paper. I'm doing it because I think I have good control, but I don't want you to do it because then you'll get your paper all dirty. So in the next box, I'm going to get some red here, and I am doing wet on dry. That's our next technique, and I want you to let the brush dry out. I want you to feel it dry out. I want you to let it fade out like that. This dry brush technique, let it run all the way out. So this is as the brush is fully loaded. This one is as the brush is losted. So I'm just going over it a little bit and pulling that around. I went back. So this is the dry brush technique. Notice I didn't jam my brush onto here. I am just sweeping it across the page. I want you to see it run out. So again, fully loaded, and then as it runs out, I'm going to mix in my mixing cup. And now I'm going to mix wet on wet. I do feel like I need to use a different color. Yeah, let's just stick with red. So I put some more paint from my pan, this is the pan, into my mixing tray. Now I'm going to clean my brush off and my mixing one, and then I'm going to get water on my brush from my clean cup so that the water that I put on here won't be muddy and it will be perfectly clear. So use 2 cups. It's going to prevent everything from getting too muddy. So I'm getting this whole square wet first. And then I'm going to get paint directly from my tray and watching it bleed out like that. That's what I fell in love with watercolor. I do that on both sides so it meets in the middle. And now I'm taking paint directly from the pan. My brush is wet. I did dip it back into the mixing one because I knew all that one was red, and I want to make it even more. So this is wet on wet, and this is where the watercolor is blossoming. You can continue to do that, and it's going to give you really cool textures and effects. So I'm just letting the paper do whatever it wants since that's where I put all my water. I'm going to rinse off my brush in my mixing jar. I'm going to let that one sit. The next one I'm going to do, and I'm starting from left to right so that my hand doesn't get too messy. I'm going to mix on my paper 2 colors together, red and purple. I love making a good red violet. I'm going to do a wet on dry, so my paper is dry, the paintbrush is wet and full of paint. Loading it up, you can even see the bristle of my brushes are red. I want it to not dry out all the way. So as it starts to dry out and lose all that paint, I'm going to load it again, go all the way up to my edges. Now I'm going to mix it. And I like to get my edge wet here just a little bit. And then I'm going to damp it up and dry it. Just so it didn't end in a harsh line, I like it to fade out. Now I got my brush clean. I dipped it in my clean water mixing cup. And I'm going to fully load it. I'm going to put purple right there. If there are any colors left over, it will mix into that because as soon as it's wet, it'll be activated. I'm adding more water into that. And now I'm going to start mixing my purple towards the red. fade out like this. More purple onto here. Going back and forth, making a nice red violet. I do want some of that red to stay, so I am adding in some more of my red from my tray and putting that red right back on here, and I'm sweeping from edge to edge, blending that purple in with the red. And you can see some of those lines. That's because I'm using a pointed brush. Now I'm going to continue that red down here, really mix it in with that violet, and since it is a little wet, it is going to flatten out. Now I'm going to put more purple in my mixing tray, and I'm going to make it nice and dark purple down here, or violet. Going to fill in my corners. And now I have a really nice value scale of color. And I do want you to try doing this. This one's just fun. I'm getting clean water and I'm drawing a design with my brush. And now I'm going to fully load my brush with paint. And I am going to dip it in there, and I want you to watch it flow. The paint is only going to go where I tell it to go, because that's the only part that has water. This is the magic. Everywhere where that dips is going to flow. Finish that up right there. Must have not put enough water there. And you can pull from that, make it bigger if you want. So we are just pulling out that paint. So all of that paint that I just put down is going to flow into that area. I want you to see that you can put the paint down first and push it around. And have fun. So that one was definitely a wet on wet technique. Now the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to make a little value scale. We probably should have done that first. Kind of did with this one, but now I want it to be smooth and subtle. So this is how dark I can make my violet. And I want to use the technique where I'm like I did earlier, where I'm pulling the color. So I just went directly from my pan, and now I'm diluting it with water, putting it in my mixing tray. And now it's going to be lighter. I want to see you get this nice and smooth. Then I'm going to add a little bit more water in my tray. It's going to get lighter. Now I'm not going to add any more water. I washed my brush off, and now I'm going into my clean water. Getting this all wet up here so it flows, and that's all just going to flow up on its own. Getting my edges nice and clean. So now I have a really nice subtle value scale that flows, and I'm using my brush to smooth areas out. Let me zoom out. The next thing I want us to do, I did rotate my paper so that I can work on this area a little bit better while that part dries. I would like to do a salt technique. So I'm going to get this one pretty wet with light water first. Maybe we should save salt for the end. Yeah, let's save salt for the end. I just got it wet first. And now I'm going to get colors directly from the pan. And I'm going to do my blossoms. It will look different when it dries. I'm spreading them all out. and it creates this really nice celling effect. It creates cells, C-E-L-L, not S. So this one's pretty neat. It's my favorite. You can add other colors on it too. I want to add blue because that would look really dope. And it just flows in between and it pushes and it goes around. It will look different as it dries depending on how much pigment you've added from your mixing tray. And up here it's dried already, so it's lost that magic. That's okay, I'm just going to blend that out then. And then do it again with a darker blue. Not doing it as much. There we go. It's still going to create that nice flowing technique. You can put dots in the middle to really make it happen. You see how quickly those ones dried. I think the next one we need to do is the blowing one. So we have to make sure that everybody is sitting far apart. So I'm going to get my paper wet first with my clean water. Only the bottom half. Uh-oh, she's bleeding. That's fine, we're gonna use blue for the next one. But if you mess up, this is an important happy accident. We can fix that by lifting the color. And if something's starting to bleed, you can fix that pool. All right, so the next thing we're gonna do a little drippage. So I'm putting a lot of paint here. We're gonna let it bleed and do its thing. I'm going to pool up the water right here. I'm creating a swimming pool. I'm going to add a little bit more pigment in here. I'm going to take a deep breath. Again, be away from people for this, and then put your mask back on. And be careful not to get it in the other sections. It's my favorite thing to do. Also in that section, or maybe somewhere else, you can choose to add a little pizzazz. So right now I'm getting my paintbrush super duper wet. And I'm going to be doing this in a concentrated manner. Where should I add it? Because I want to add the salt there. I'm going to do it right here. Holding my brush horizontal to the paper. And I'm tapping, so I'm doing a controlled splatter. Did it in an area that it'd be okay if it got in. You can flick it to the side, but you see that I lost my control and it splattered in other areas. Now this next one, I'm going to do some swirling on here. I'm just going to do wet on dry to really get that color nice and saturated. I want to show you that you can mix the colors here together on the paper again. My paintbrush is really wet, this is really dry. We can also mix the colors together in the tray. Oh, I love blue violet. You can see how that looks. So I'm just doing a swirly technique. I'm going to add some blues in there. You see how it just flows nicely. And it still has to be pretty wet, otherwise this isn't going to work. So I'm just going to add another layer of wet on here. Really let that stuff fade and do whatever it wants, adding a bunch more blue. And then while this is wet, I'm going to, I just didn't even have to crank my salt. I'm going to do that. And that's going to pull up, the salt is going to pull up all that color and absorb it, and you won't really see what that looks like till it dries, but it creates a really nice cool crystal effect. So we've done a lot of different techniques, and that one does have to be pretty wet for that to do. So I'm not going to pick this up, I'm going to move out so you can see all the cool things that I've done. You can also just sprinkle this salt right over it. I'll do it in this little area here. You can just take a pinch, you can control it, but if I do much more than that, then nothing's going to look really cool. I usually let this fade out. do some small sprinkles. So that's going to look like a cluster, and then it's going to fade out. So I like to add textures like that because I think it looks really, really, really cool. And now you can feel that this stuff has dried. And now you can do cute little tiny fine point painting designs. My brush is kind of dry now. And I think on here, my go-to shape is this swirl. You can paint on top of it and now it won't bleed. When I can't think of what else to do, I just create little swirls. You don't have to create swirls. You could draw bats for all I care. You could draw letters. There's that bell. So sorry, that must have been annoying. I can't control it. So now you can do your cool fine details. So that's why we do our backgrounds first, because we can paint over things. And that's going to be how we do trees and things and landscapes. So my brush is kind of wet, but it's not soaking wet, and I'm just using the tip of this brush. That's how we do our little fine details. Cute and simple. And then we can pull off our tape. Hi. And then we're done.